I suppose what concern in Daltonga, for those who don't know, what concern in Daltonga Hilfe bring to the Global Hunger Index is, I think, the reality on the ground. So we've got 2 case studies from NGOs, and I'll just start with one from concern, which is focused really on land tenure in Tanzania. I'll go quickly through it because I realise we're running out of time and Raju will be after me. Tanzania is fairly serious on the GHI, not alarming but close to it. 1 million people are food insecure, roughly 1 million people. 42% of the households have inadequate food. Around 80% of the population relies on farming for income and food. 95% of the land is cultivated by farmers less than 3 hectares. And I think it's only something like 10% of those people have actually got tenure. Again, people cultivated with the very simple hand hoe, and farmers obviously, lack the inputs, particularly the capital, to invest in their farms. This is the kind of basic implements used in countries like South Sudan, Tanzania to hold land. In Tanzania, there has been a Land Act and a Village Land Act enabled in 1999, and basically the purpose of it was to formalise tenure occupancy and to resolve customary rights issues, which have been there since really Nyerera's time. People now have a right or entitlement to a certificate of customary right of occupancy. So in fact, the president actually owns all of the land in Tanzania. People have a right to occupancy. The intent obviously is so that people will invest in their land, but also interestingly to create much more gender equality. Under customary law, women have been very much marginalised in terms of the right to own land. And the point here is that we're trying to get women tenure. We know how many women are the farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. The land the act itself is actually quite progressive, but as usual, it's always quite difficult to implement. So what's interesting is that the CCROs are actually not recognised as instruments of mortgage, even though that was part of the intent, that people could then use it as collateral to get loans to invest in their land. Concern has actually been using a rights-based approach. We're not very strong on this, but we actually have been using this for about 5 years now, focusing very much on the duty bearers, which would be the government, to ensure that people do get certificates of occupancy, and also then the rights holders, people themselves, to understand they have a right to this certificate and to land tenure. And I think that's what we really bring to the table, making people aware that they actually have a right to tenure and then helping them to get this certificate. And again, that's very much the traditional role of an NGO, and that's what we have been doing. Again, these are people happy with their certificates. I think if you look at the bigger picture, in 2010 the government launched this SAGCOT, which is the Southern Agricultural Growth Corridor in Tanzania. And it's roughly 1/3 of the country where there's going to be a lot of investment in increased agricultural productivity aimed at both commercial and smallholder farmers. Clearly, if smallholder farmers don't have tenure, there's a real danger of land grabbing or inappropriate investment, corruption, etc. And I think this is what's important. At the moment, actually going through Parliament is setting up a new land authority, and they're trying to actually make sure that there's going to be compensation from investors in land, which will be equitably distributed, and that farmers will actually get a compensation fund from their land when they're given over to investors. Interestingly enough, there's not as much spare land as people thought when they actually go and survey it at village level. Land value is also obviously linked to water. There's a lot of land available, but there's not so much water available, and the land that has access and is close to water is of much higher value. Again, this is just the local land district land office with the registers we're doing. Just the conclusion basically is that in Iringa district in Tanzania, we do see very high food insecurity, and there is actually quite high stunting as well in that part of the world. Smallholders have no land tenure, especially women farmers. That's obviously what we're trying to change. They have no incentive or ability to invest in inputs and in irrigation. I think overall there's a lack of policy coherence, and then obviously a lack of policy implementation. It's very much the policy implementation and the concern with work. The district land office and the village councils, who are actually the ones who do the surveying, adjudicate on disputes, etc., have very little resources, and that's obviously going to be a real problem. Concern's actually interested, and we had a failed 3IE grant application a couple of years ago with Columbia University and Trinity in Dublin to do basically a randomised controlled trial on the impact of gaining title, whether in fact it makes a difference to gender inequality and to whether people invest in land or not, just to make sure that we get high level evidence. So I think I'll hand over to Matthias.
Thank you very much, Connell.